What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Now, the following is a presentation by Brian Jackson. Now, I met Brian recently at Contact in the Desert, where he was giving a presentation to various individuals such as Ross Coulthart. And the presentation covers the research and work that Brian has been doing for many years on the story of Dan Burisch. Now, Dan Burisch is an alleged microbiologist who worked at Area S4 many years ago, on an extraterrestrial, or with an extraterrestrial named JRod. Now, I came across Dan Burisch's story over a decade ago. There are many interviews with him on YouTube, but like a lot of people, I kind of forgot about it. And, there was all this rumor that it was just a hoax. And so I kind of forgot about it. But recently, with the great research of Brian, it's come back into the kind of conversation a little bit more. I know Brian's been on other podcasts and has given this presentation in the past, but what we have here is Brian presenting the most up-to-date version of his presentation on the Dan Burisch story. I just thought it'd be great to get it on this channel, to have him present this wonderful slideshow with all of this information for you guys to make your own minds up about the Dan Burisch story. And then hopefully in a few weeks' time, Brian's going to come back and we're going to do more of a Q&A on Brian's work. But for now, I hope you enjoy this presentation by Brian Jackson on the Dan Burisch story.
Dan Burisch was at the heart of controversy in the early 2000s, but by 2008, his presence had significantly diminished within the broader UFO research community. Today, he's virtually absent from the current conversations on the phenomenon. I've titled this Refocusing the Dan Burisch story because I believe that his claims remain deeply significant. The biology of a living captive extraterrestrial, technologies that revealed potential future timelines, and most importantly, alleged agreements with multiple species, agreements that may be critical to humanity's preparation for what was to be a coming catastrophe. But for a while, I stepped away from focused study within ufology, but the depth of what's at stake demands renewed attention to his story. Here's the overview. I'm going to give you broad strokes of his story, his early life growing up, how I came in contact with the case, corroboration and verification with documentation, then the secret S4 facility and its protocols, and recent substantiation and further support, and finally a recap and implications if this is true. But what's really important to understand is this quote. My friend Bill Ryan summed this up perfectly. Stories like this are incredibly complex, but this unique case does yield one significant gem, a rare find with any insider or whistleblower claim. And that is an overwhelming amount of material to study. Hardly the result of a hoax, fraud, or as one journalist wrote about Dan, a phony baloney goofball. I contend that some people drew conclusions about him far too early, or they are driven by an agenda. Let's clear this up early. The last name Crane and Burisch are used as a last name for Dan in this presentation. Some have wrongly taken this as evidence of deceit, but in truth, Dan legally changed his name to Burisch in 1995 after marrying Deborah K. Burisch, honoring her stepdaughter's wishes to keep the name. But after the divorce in 2007, he reverted back to Crane. Most of the material I'll discuss occurred during the, quote, Burisch period, which is how he's best known. Here are the main points of the story. Dan began his biological studies in 1982 at the University of Nevada in Las Vegas. While there, in 1986, at age 22, he was recruited by the U.S. government to work on classified programs. As his security clearance increased, the U.S. Navy co-funded his doctoral studies for his PhD in microbiology and molecular genetics from State University of New York. Dan completed his degree and received his PhD in 1989. He worked under Majestic on Project Aquarius, eventually becoming the working group leader in the study of a living extraterrestrial entity being housed in a special environmental clean sphere at the Papoose Site 4 facility south of Groom Lake, Nevada. His primary task involved biological tissue sampling and genetic studies to address the JRod's severe peripheral neuropathy and degenerative disorders. This required developing a unique DNA sequencing technique and Dan often experienced the JRod's pain directly due to his psychic connection, fostering deep compassion. This work eventually granted him rare access to world-altering technologies and information, ultimately leading to his placement within Majestic, who also quietly influenced decisions affecting all of humanity without the public's awareness. The MJ-12 leader at the time, and whom was designated MJ-1, was U.S. Vice Admiral John McConnell, or John Mike McConnell. He served 29 years in the military. He was former Vice Admiral of the U.S. Navy. He served as Director of National Security Agency from 1992 to 1996, and as the United States Director of National Intelligence from February 2007 to January 2009 during the Bush administration and the first week of the Obama administration. For reasons too complicated to summarize here, he and Dan were very close, and this bond would yield tremendous benefits and privileges while Dan was on the program. McConnell and Dr. Edward Teller played a crucial role in recruiting Dan into Project Aquarius. A significant part of this program was conducted at Groom Lake, Nevada, commonly known as Area 51, but now renamed Air Force Test Center Detachment 3. Project Aquarius was initiated in 1953 to study extraterrestrial life forms, and in Dan's case, an individual species known as a JRod. This JRod was one of two kept alive from the infamous Kingman, Arizona crash of 1953. One was sent to Los Alamos National Laboratory to a facility nicknamed Sweetness, and one was transferred to Area 51 and eventually relocated to the Papoose Lake S4 facility located 12 miles southwest of the main Groom Lake base. S4 is a highly classified subterranean facility in a remote area of the desert extending 5 levels deep. The facility itself is meticulously camouflaged, reinforcing the deep secrecy of the program. Within the lowest levels of the complex, a specialized chamber was constructed to maintain the precise environmental conditions necessary for the JRod survival. Dan's responsibilities required direct interaction with the being, primarily for biological tissue sampling and genetic studies. Dan, along with his working associate, Dr. Arthur Price, made significant advances in developing a unique sequencing technique for DNA that would ultimately reveal the JRod's connection to our future human lineage, and that the being was unquestionably a time traveler. The being was suffering from a peripheral neuropathy, a congenital condition causing muscle atrophy, difficulty walking, and an inability to regulate body temperature due to a lack of antifreeze glycoproteins. Dan would ultimately learn that factions within the U.S. government held long-term agreements with various other life forms beyond the JRods, and that these agreements are revisited every 9 years. Who remembers David Grush not responding in the negative when asked twice by Ross Coulthard if we have agreements with NHI? This revelation is one of the most significant takeaways from this presentation, as I believe these agreements still influence the current disclosure movement and quite possibly current major geopolitical decisions worldwide. One of the most extraordinary technologies at the time within the S4 Papoose facility was the looking glass device, along with the Orion Cube. Both allowed for glimpses into future events and the ability to foresee outcomes in advance. Information obtained from these devices was critical, revealing potential future catastrophes, details about certain JRod's actions that could lead to a potential downfall in 2012, and indicating that humanity's unity and rise in consciousness might be vital for survival during a period of transition. The Orion Cube required specially trained individuals who could emotionally connect with the device. To serve the evolving needs of the MJ-12 group, later renamed the Committee of the Majority, one of the treaty agreements with non-human intelligences mandated the eventual disclosure of their existence to the world. This was intended to prepare humanity for extraterrestrial contact and mitigate potential catastrophic consequences. Ethical considerations, concerns over genetic implications, and the need to ensure a balanced future for humanity further reinforced the urgency of this initiative. Eventually, as a result, Dan was elevated to an entry-level position within Majestic that served multiple strategic purposes. One, it enhanced his public credibility and perception for disclosure. Two, it facilitated negotiations and diplomatic efforts, both foreign and domestic, to guide humanity's future. And three, and most importantly, positioned him as the face of disclosure, allowing him to speak openly about his background in education. However, it was later revealed that Dan harbored deep resentment toward Majestic for selecting him for this role. While he honored their wishes, Dan never wanted to be the public face of disclosure. So, it's now abundantly clear that these extraordinary claims must be weighed against substantive evidence. We do not have the privilege of accessing the facilities where Dan worked, participating in shadowy conversations, or witnessing what he experienced firsthand. But a common method of research for evaluating such claims is to gather as much intelligence as possible about the individual making them. Is he truly who he claims to be? Did he work where he says he did? Were there others who can corroborate his story? What conclusions have other investigators reached after examining his claims? To begin, let's take a closer look at who Dan Burisch is. Dan Burisch grew up in Linwood, California. His parents were John and Doreen Crane. His mother was a telex operator, and his father worked for the Purex company in Southgate. But it's important to establish this early, that in 1973, when Dan was 8 years old, he had an abduction episode while playing catch with his grandfather near their home at Mayboyer Park. Dan witnessed a chevron-shaped craft and had missing time for hours. And it would be years later that Dan came to understand that he had been abducted by the occupants of a UFO and intellectually enhanced for a specific purpose related to his future work for the US government. After this experience, Dan suddenly had an interest in the sciences, especially microscopy, and soon he was gifted his first Tasco microscope for Christmas. Later, he would be taken under the wing of Dr. Jim Reynolds, the director of pathology from Long Beach Memorial Hospital in California, where he was taught the art and science of histology and medical biology. At 15, Dan became the youngest member of the Los Angeles Microscopical Society. During this time, elements within the U.S. government began to take notice of him. This type of monitoring is not unusual, as even today, the Navy actively promotes STEM and GATE education to cultivate young talent for future career opportunities, particularly within the military and defense sectors. Programs like the Office of Naval Research fund educational initiatives and research projects, often in collaboration with schools, universities, and scientific institutions. The government's interest was initially tentative, but noted his aptitude for recognizing and identifying patterns under magnification. Eventually, in college, during his last semester at UNLV, Dan was approached by 3 men who offered him employment in a secret biology-related program. After a significant time of testing, this led to his involvement in top secret black budget operations and eventually work under Majestic. For a short time while on the program and while pursuing his PhD, partially funded with the assistance of Dr. Edward Teller, Dan was required to maintain a cover job. He worked as a parole and probation officer for the state of Nevada, and occasionally he worked security at the Sahara, Fiesta, and Aladdin casinos. During this time, government agents would occasionally bring tissue samples of unknown origin to his office, along with a high-powered microscope for analysis. This was still a testing phase. Dan's professors were informed that he was a student of special government interest. He received specialized learning modules from the State University of New York and was occasionally flown there for advanced studies under military escort. He also completed assignments and testing in Las Vegas. Dan successfully defended his dissertation on his thesis entitled The Use of Hypochlorite Complexes on Malignant Tissue, and earned his doctorate in cellular biology in 1989. His professors from State University of New York were flown to Las Vegas to administer his final examination. So, my story, how I first discovered this. I've been studying UFO phenomenon since 1989, and in around 2012, after taking several years away from active research to focus on raising my family, I decided to use my work lunch hours to revisit some of the more controversial cases from the past. As I explored, I came across the testimony of Bill Uhouse, an engineer from Los Alamos National Laboratory, who similarly claimed to have encountered a JRod at that institution. I discovered that veteran researcher Bill Hamilton was the principal investigator of the Burisch story. He was highly respected by all in the UFO research community, known for his rigorous investigative approach, consistently grounded in the scientific method, characterized by thorough research, data-driven analysis, and meticulous attention to verifying supported materials. Since 1990, after I first attended one of his lectures, I made it a point to attend every one of his talks. Bill granted me special permission to record his lectures, allowing me to archive at least 20 of his talks. He and his wife Pamela and I remained close until he relocated to Phoenix in 1997. But important to this story is that he spoke at an event in Los Angeles in the year 2000, and I made sure to attend. He spoke then about a fascinating document that had recently leaked on forums, known as the Q94-109A, allegedly originating from someone named B.J. Wolf. It was a highly scientific document detailing the study of an extraterrestrial being, describing its biological composition and its connection to human DNA. In the lecture, Bill said that BJ was in communication with one of the document's authors, a scientist directly involved in the study. Now, let's cut to 2012. I decided to revisit the controversial story of JRod, despite the broader UFO research community having largely dismissed it as a hoax. But I was still unaware at the time of my friend Bill's connection to the story. Diving in, I discovered a vast amount of material to study. For instance, I found up to 16 videos of Dan, articles written about his claims by prominent researchers, radio interviews, and more. Therefore, I made a conscious decision to follow the story's unfolding from its inception to its conclusion. So I began by watching the earliest video interview. The first interview of Dan was from September 2002. To my surprise, I instantly recognized my friend Bill's voice asking questions of Dan, and also referencing a woman off camera. He referred to her as BJ. Again, it's now 2012, and at that moment, everything clicked. I connected this detail to my earliest memory of Bill discussing this case back in 2000 and his liaison named BJ. Now I was energized to uncover everything I could about this case, being inspired by Bill's work. Of note was Dan's rebellious personality and always stepping over the line. Dan Burisch was scrutinized, monitored, censored, imprisoned, and beaten many times by operatives within Majestic. He was severely punished for unauthorized release of information, specifically a book he co-authored in 1998 entitled Eagles Disobey, which discussed anomalies on Mars. His memory was manipulated in 1998 as a consequence of his rebelliousness related to Eagles Disobey work. When memory conditioning failed, his memory returned. He reportedly fled, was recaptured, and subjected to reconditioning. Suffice to say, beatings happened whenever he stepped out of the line. By the way, this is Bill's book that chronicled all of the details from his research. Legendary multi-Emmy winning UFO investigator Linda Moulton Howe was also drawn to the case, contributing her research, especially in verifying Dan's academic credentials and testimony from interviews with Dan's parents, Doreen and John, who both recalled the time their son agreed to begin working on classified government projects. They confirmed that on many occasions, Dan was picked up in front of their home by military escorts at all hours of the day and night for transport to Area 51. Dan's mother once followed him and witnessed him boarding the plane at the Janet Terminal at McCarran Airport that flies staff to Area 51. Here's the result of my research and the legacy efforts of other investigators. Dan worked at some of the most prestigious classified institutions in U.S. government laboratories, including the research facilities at Groom Lake, Dulce at Los Alamos, Brookhaven National Laboratory, and Lawrence Livermore Laboratories. He was also stationed in the Middle East during the First Gulf War, where he served as a defense biowarfare specialist. But most notably, from 1991 to 2006, he worked at Area 51 S4, where much of his classified research took place. Although today Dan is still alive and living in Canada, he remains under strict protection, surrounded by handlers, security, and also a doctor assigned to ensure his well-being. As a result, direct contact with him is now virtually impossible. Admiral McConnell served as both mentor and protector to Dan, often described as a godfather-like figure in his life. In 2005, McConnell appointed Dan as to the seat of Representative number 9 within Majestic. I would learn of the significance of this seat from a 1.5-hour phone call I was allowed to have with Dan himself in 2018. It is claimed that McConnell's influence within Majestic and his high-ranking position in national security played a crucial role in allowing him to remain alive, especially given the unsettling details of how over 50 other Black Ops scientists and biologists had died under mysterious circumstances since the early 2000s. Dan claims to have been a member of all the associations listed here, but like many government contractors involved in Black programs, his records have been erased, at least from publicly accessible sources. I'm going to read something that came from a book by a gentleman named Douglas Yauvan entitled Sheep Dipped, The Historical Evolution of Covert Military Operations. In it, he says this: the erasure of records is a common practice for individuals working on classified projects. It is typically called sheep dipping. This measure serves both as a protective mechanism for the individual and as a tool for plausible deniability if ever required. By systematically removing official documentation of a person's academic background, professional affiliations, and career history, it becomes nearly impossible for adversaries, whether foreign intelligence agencies or investigative journalists, to track, identify, or verify their expertise. This level of secrecy ensures that even if a name surfaces in connection with a sensitive program, there's no accessible paper trail linking them to classified work, effectively safeguarding both the individual and the integrity of the program itself. Dr. Teller expressed interest in Dan's work while Dan was studying at UNLV, and would later reach out to arrange further studies for him with State University of New York for his PhD. During Dan's education at State University of New York, William J. Lenars was Dan's supervisor, professor, and possibly liaison with Dr. Teller. Dr. Lenars is an expert in glycoproteins and is a fellow of the American Academy of Sciences. I discovered through my research he was in fact professor at the university at the time Dan claimed to be attending classes there between 1986 and 1989. These are a couple of his other professors as well: Erwin London and Sanford Simon. And these people, again, I did my own research and found out they were actually there at the same time. Now, Dan's mother was an invaluable resource for research, having catalogs of all of his certifications and other documentation. On this and the following pages are Dan's official certificates of graduation, scholarships, honor society memberships, scholarship nominations. However, she does not have a chronicle of a record of Dan's PhD. Here's some academic letters of recommendation, various affidavits that were drawn up that make the claim that he did in fact have a PhD. Lots of documentation on him. But this is a key point that establishes Dan's claimed education. His doctorate and other degrees is clearly listed in multiple marquee Who's Who journals, and its attainment is affirmed by his parents and a former coworker via sworn affidavits. However, official records at SUNY, State University of New York, were reportedly suppressed or altered a deliberate action taken as part of an effort to maintain secrecy around his classified work. Marquise stands as the gold standard for documenting academic and professional excellence. Inclusion is highly selective, offering credible third-party validations of one's expertise. Dan's listing affirms his achievements and provides undeniable proof against skepticism. And here's just a close-up of 2 copies of the journal that I purchased myself just to see in ink the actual listing of Dan's credentials. And his PhD is very clearly listed. In 2008, Dan was invited to speak at Caltech. Dan Burisch and his colleague, Marcia McDowell, spoke at Caltech's infamous Beckman Auditorium about the Lotus Project, their scientific research project at the request of Professor Houman Owadi. Project Lotus is a classified project that studies a genesis mechanism associated with the tree of life. That is, the investigation of a phenomenon involving silicate material, Ganesh particles, and their potential effects on cellular repair and the origins of life. The full lecture is still available to watch online. The invitation to speak at a prestigious institution like Caltech is reserved for the exceptional. Here's a small list of invited past lecturers. You can see the names of people like Einstein, Hawking, Kip Thorne, Bill Gates. Just amazing names spoke there. And to this day, it's still listed on the Caltech website, Dan and Marcy's talk. These are just some screenshots you can still find and watch online of the lecture. Now, this is an interesting tidbit that came relatively late and very recent to me. In the latter chapters of Bill Hamilton's book, he notes evidence of a correspondence between 2 Area 51 employees that spoke of Dan's work there. One is retired Air Force Major and Intelligence Officer Thomas Mack. The other is also in the Air Force, is another Air Force intelligence officer and someone I befriended some time ago. I used the opportunity to reach out and ask if they have any proof of this correspondence, and I was happy to find that this person had a handwritten letter from Tom Mack. He quickly scanned it and sent it to me, and what it would reveal was very eye-opening. The highlighted area of this April 1999 letter reads, "There was a Captain Denny Crane who was assigned to the QS-4 projects sometime in the late 1980s. Captain Crane was a biologist who worked on the R4800 program at PS2 Complex. His assistant was Captain Arthur Price. Both were in charge with mapping alien DNA. Captain Crane developed a sequencing technique. They were dating the sequence of found amino acids. The alien was a coatyloid, Amos. This sequence found was nothing like humans. Captain Crane even baffled genetic scientists with his findings. Captain Price is now working with Dr. Kit Green at the CIA." So although it clearly references Dan working there, there's also some confusion about the alien's name and the claim that what he was discovering was non-human. Let's now dive into the Papoose Lake facility where Dan worked underground. Papoose is approximately 12 miles southwest of Area 51. This shows the relative location that Papoose has to Groom Lake, Area 51, now renamed Air Force Test Center Detachment 3. Various research by others indicates the facility is sometimes referenced as Site 4, S4, S2 Alpha, and from the Tom Mack letter, PS2 Complex. Just zooming in here, you can see the tremendous camouflage nature of the facility. This showcases the cutting edge ingenuity behind next generation government black site construction. And I will tell you right now, I have undeniable evidence this is now a reality, that it is exactly where I've circled it. This is a CGI depiction of the main entrance door. And this is CGI renderings that illustrate a hangar door opening for a test flight of a recovered extraterrestrial craft based on detailed accounts from physicist engineer Bob Lazar, who claimed to have worked on reverse engineering such technology. Testimonies from program workers describe the facility as purely utilitarian, devoid of aesthetics, built for total focus. Heavily armed Black Guard units escorted each scientist and engineer to their assigned locations daily. Upon entry, Dan was required to strip and be weighed nude near the entrance. From that point on, extreme anti-smuggling measures were enforced. Even bathroom breaks were under armed escort with ceiling cameras recording every move. Dan described the atmosphere as deeply oppressive, where only the work mattered. Dan said the facility's labs were state-of-the-art, fully equipped for advanced biological research. For security, weighing sensors were built into the floors at each workstation, tracking scientists' movement in real time. Dan said facility security always knew his schedule in advance. In elevators, guards stood with their backs to cover the floor buttons, feeling for the correct one and counting silently, never revealing which floor he was taken to. Aerospace historian Michael Schratt met with Dan to recreate the facility and its interior in exacting detail. When I spoke with Michael in 2024, he emphasized how precise Dan was, especially about the clean sphere, which housed the JRod for medical research under the Aquarius program. Dan described it as roughly 52 feet wide and 26 feet tall, engineered to match the JRod's unique physiology. The environment maintained a hyperbaric mix of 4 to 5% nitrogen and oxygen, high pressure, and temperatures between 20 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Humans couldn't survive inside without a TES, or total encapsulating suit. These conditions were designed to slow the JRod's disease. Prior to any interaction, the clean sphere containing the JRod was elevated from a restricted lower level via a precision-engineered scissor lift system. Due to strict compartmentalization protocols, Dan was never informed of the rationale behind the lower level containment, the life support procedures in place, or the identities of personnel assigned to the being's care. Before entering the sphere, Dan underwent strict decontamination, a medical examination, and included a full-body disinfectant spray before donning the TES suit, similar to an astronaut suit. The suit featured a long umbilical hose for oxygen and temperature control, creating a positive pressure, sealed environment to protect him from potential microbes during contact with the JRod. His eyeglass prescription was eventually beveled directly into the helmet glass. And this is just a really short AI video I created that demonstrates what the normal protocol would have been for Dan to get ready to go into the clean sphere. The suit that he was wearing featured a long umbilical hose for oxygen and temperature control. It created a positive pressure sealed environment to protect him from potential microbes. The JRod identified himself to Dan as Kaela. Dan described him as approximately 3 to 3.5 feet tall, with a dark brown, ruddy complexion. He belonged to a class of grays originating from the Zeta Reticuli binary star system. Though he was stationed at Gliese 876c, a known staging area. The designation JRod translates to 15, referring to the number of light years from Earth. Kaela was classified as a P plus 52 JRod, meaning he was 52,000 years more evolved than present-day humans. At the time of the crash, he had been traveling with 2 P plus 45s. Physically, Kaela had a reticulated lizard-like skin texture that was smooth to the touch. His head was disproportionately large with large black eyes, a recessed nose with 2 small holes, and a small slit-like mouth with no teeth. He had long arms with 4 extended fingers and a noticeable knob at the heels of his feet. Suffering from severe neuropathy, he often appeared hunched and had difficulty with movement. His appearance was described as insect-like, almost exoskeletal. At the time, he was 622 years old. While in the clean sphere, Dan's protocol required him to take skin aspirations from the JRod's arm with a special gun-like device. This is an AI simulation I created of Dan taking one of the aspirations from the entity. Between 1994 and 1996, Dan used a pressurized induction needle system to extract hundreds of tissue samples from the JRod's arm. These samples were willingly provided by the JRod under prior agreements. Although the procedure was painful, Dan later revealed that he maintained a continuous psychic connection with the entity whenever he was within approximately 60 feet. One of the more fascinating byproducts of this connection was that Dan reportedly experienced the JRod's pain during each aspiration in real time. He performed these extractions using his left hand, applying pressure for 15 minutes following each procedure. Over time, more than 200 samples were analyzed and included in a final report. Now let's transition into another incredible claim by Dan, but one that would be revealed through another piece of technology within the facility called the Orion Cube. In the summer of 2007, Dan was inducted into a classified intelligence project that required 6 months of total isolation from friends and family. And by December, he met with UFO investigators Carrie Cassidy and Bill Ryan, speaking with them for over 5 hours. During the conversation, he revealed that the project involved a device known as the Orion Cube, technology capable of viewing probable future events. The project's objective was to determine which of these futures was most likely to unfold. The Orion Cube, a quantum viewing device, is described as a holographic record that documents history and presents future occurrences and probabilities. This device is a variant of the looking glass technology, notable because of its output projected above. It could be altered by the presence and emotions of its users. And at one time, this cube was believed to be stored at Area S4, level 4-1. Later, it was moved to the Scottish Rite Masonic Temple just outside Washington, D.C., and its location after that is unknown. The cube was reportedly used by elitists in various countries to look into their own futures and select favorable paths, but it is now believed to be no longer accessible. The outcome of the 6-month project was Timeline 1, Variation 83, or T1V83, which, according to projections, pointed to a future marked by the election of Hillary Clinton, a massive financial collapse, and a catastrophic event that would ultimately lead to the division of humanity into 2 distinct life forms. Dan further explained that world leaders had begun using the cube as a kind of script, taking preemptive actions in an attempt to steer or nudge events away from that projected future. Importantly, the predicted events, such as Hillary Clinton's 2008 election, ultimately did not occur, suggesting that these nudging efforts and humanity's collective consciousness successfully altered the most probable future timeline, offering a message of hope and agency. So I created this infographic to simplify the message Dan had from that 2007 program. Essentially, there would be an Earth catastrophe that we would have been aware of in advance, but it would claim the lives of 4 billion. But in anticipation of this, significant population would migrate off-planet to Mars and another lives in subterranean underground zones. After some time, the Mars population resets in the Orion constellation, where the subterranean group, after 4,000 years, resets far away at this Zeta Reticuli system. The evolutionary changes because of the difference in the environmental conditions creates the tall Orions, and the ones that were subterranean become the Greys and JRods. Eventually, they reunited in the future in 52,000 years, but the JRods slowly have been suffering from a bunch of neuropathy issues and genetic issues and a declination in their physiological makeup. Who remembers catching this tidbit from Catherine Austin Fitts in a recent interview with Tucker Carlson?
The underground base and city infrastructure and transportation system that's been built. And
I'm sorry?
Yes. So we have built an extraordinary number of underground bases and supposedly transportation systems. Some of these are documented as part of the national security infrastructure. I think there are many more.
In the United States?
In the United States, on all over the world. From 2021 to 2023, I took one of the smartest subscribers in the Slayer Report network, and he and I spent 2 years collecting all the data and all the allegations on underground bases. We systematically went through and tried to estimate our guess, this is totally a guess, of how many underground bases, both underground in the United States, but also underground under the ocean around the United States. And our estimate was 170 with a transportation network connecting them.
And what would be the purpose?
If you thought you were going to get a near extinction event,
I thought that was telling when I heard that. Dan's claims are entered into Congressional Record last year as well. I discovered that journalist Michael Schellenberger included Dan's case in his submission into Record after his November 13 House Oversight Committee hearing on unidentified anomalous phenomena. Dan's name is noted 9 times in the submitted documentation, including another person, Henry Deacon, who vouched for the veracity of Dan's claims. Michael was there primarily to give testimony about the recently leaked Immaculate Constellation Pentagon program, but within his submitted documentation were others who worked on programs of note. Here you can see Dan's name noted 9 times in the documentation. This is a matter of public record. You can look it up. Now let's talk about another recent individual. A 27-year-old Harold Malgrim literally saved the world from nuclear catastrophe during the Cuban Missile Crisis when Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara and President JFK asked him to buy time for diplomacy by facing off against General Curtis LeMay. Malgrim went on to become a presidential advisor to not just JFK, but LBJ, Nixon, and Ford. He had a personal relationship with Putin and advised every Japanese prime minister since Tanaka in the 1970s, Giscard d'Estaing, Pompidou, and others. He was assigned to contain Kissinger and work closely with Howard Baker, George Shultz, Volcker, and Mondale, not to mention Nobel Prize winners Tom Schelling and Sir John Hicks. Unusually, he had all the so-called Q clearances as well. From a 3-hour interview on American Alchemy just before his passing in February 2025, he held UFO or UAP material directly. Richard Bissell briefed Malgrim on otherworld technologies, discussed Majestic MJ-12, the group who took it upon themselves to protect the world, told his daughter Pipa off air in his final hours that there had been UFO crash survivors biologics, and he was shown a video of the sole surviving extraterrestrial being from one of the Roswell crashes. From the time Harold was just 14, he was already displaying an advanced and utterly unexplainable grasp of quantum physics concepts, years ahead of experimental confirmation. He caught the attention of Carl Compton, the president of MIT, after an impromptu 2-hour conversation. Compton offered Harold a full scholarship on the spot, noting Harold's astonishing insight into photons and quantum entanglement, ideas not yet mainstream, but undeniably these cross over into exactly Dan's claims when he was young. So here's some conclusions. Let's look at a variety of claims and find agreement about what appears indisputable. Prodigy level acuity. Highly corroborated, Dan exhibited early aptitude for microbiology, was mentored from the age 8 by Dr. James Reynolds, became the youngest member of the Los Angeles Microscopical Society, and possessed an eidetic memory. Expertise documented. Supported by his listings in the Marquis Who's Who, as well as descriptions of his scientific writings as profound. And the UAP investigators' belief. This is strongly supported by Bill Hamilton, was fundamentally at the core of Dan's story, and that he was telling the truth. Linda Howe expressed to me personally that she felt that this was one of the strongest cases ever. Dr. Roger Lear was extremely impressed as well, and Dr. J.J. Hertog found his work fascinating. Bill Ryan felt his story felt real and that Dan believed it. Dr. Michael Salla and Mark McCandlish, David Wilcock, Michael Schratt, and Paula Harris also expressed belief in his truthfulness. The affidavits. There are multiples out there. Affidavits from Dan's mother, Doreen Crane, and a former coworker, Robert Bird, concerning his PhD, as well as affidavits from Drew Sprengler, an Area 51 supervisor, corroborating Dan's presence and work there. Marcia McDowell also mentions her own affidavit. And there's an emotional authenticity to Dan, supported by observers like Bill Ryan, who notes his authenticity and passionate disposition. It's also clear Dan expresses expressions of deep frustration with those who misrepresent his experiences. The Caltech credibility, supported by the nature of the prestigious academic venue and positive endorsements from attendees like Dr. Roger Lear and the source invitee, Caltech professor Human Awadi. And then finally, the Tom Mack letter unquestionably connects Dan to an alien study program at Area 51. So now let's look at the implications. Extraterrestrial treaties exist and influence choices done on our behalf without our knowledge. A significant catastrophe may have been averted from our future and split the evolution of mankind's future into two directions. Groups like the former MJ-12 are aware of this future and operate quietly in the shadows, sometimes clashing with the agendas of other factions. Reality and consciousness are far beyond what we perceive. Multiple timelines and time travel are real. And finally, others like Dan likely exist, some silenced, others hidden from contact. This is but a snapshot of some of the critical milestones of Dan's story that I continue to update. This is my own work in creating a timeline of events, which is often super helpful to reference. But finally, after finding that my good friend Bill passed in 2014, as a kind of conclusion, Bill wrote the following about the Dan Burisch case. After all that I've heard and after piecing together over 20 different amazing testimonies, I think I finally understand the reason for the cover-up. It is a story that spans eons of time and devolves on who we are and who they are. We are all related, and DNA is the gem of the cosmos. There is so much that makes sense once I had threaded it all together that I am amazed at the feel of it, the truth of it, and the miracle of space, time, and life. The one thing I had heard time and time again is that time is short, that time is running out, that big changes are ahead, and that the world may never be the same again. Only when I check this further will I report on it. This is not just another UFO story. The cosmic code is there for all to use their intelligence to decipher. And thank you. And please make reference to my work at the Burisch Archive. And hopefully that will be included in the show notes.